The late 60s painted a picture of modern expansion across Northern California, a time characterized by outward optimism and growing confidence in civic life. Yet, beneath this veneer of progress, an unseen menace began to stir, manifesting through calculated acts of violence against unsuspecting residents. This unidentified assailant established a terrifying presence in the community, making his gruesome activities known only by claiming responsibility for the murders committed. His taunting nature was immediately apparent, suggesting not just a criminal act, but a deliberate, theatrical performance designed purely for psychological terror and maximum public alarm. The atmosphere shifted from one of normalcy to palpable dread as whispers began to circulate through suburban streets, painting a portrait of fear that defied explanation or immediate resolution. The methods by which this killer engaged with the public were as chilling as his actions themselves, relying heavily on anonymity and taunting communication. Rather than confining himself to the brutal encounters of violence, the individual chose to communicate, ensuring that his destructive message reached a wide audience through established media channels. Specific attention was drawn to the arrival of letters addressed directly to local newspapers, the very platforms meant for community connection and news dissemination. These missives carried a distinct sense of arrogance, establishing the killer as a self-proclaimed figure of notoriety. The sheer audacity of sending such taunting correspondence allowed him to manipulate public perception while remaining physically unseen by authorities or victims alike. Integral to the killer's unsettling repertoire was the inclusion of intricate encoded ciphers within these taunting messages. These cryptographic elements transformed simple letters into complex puzzles, ensuring that the mystery deepened with every subsequent dispatch. The enigmatic nature of the code served multiple purposes for the individual. It was a challenge directed at intellectual minds and an absolute barrier to understanding for any casual observer. Specialists in code breaking would become necessary merely to decipher the killer's self-aggrandizement, adding layers of complexity to the ongoing mystery. This focus on cryptography meant that solving the case hinged not only on finding physical evidence, but on mastering a secret language devised by the perpetrator himself. The publication of these taunting messages had an immediate and profound impact on the local press corps. Newspapers were forced into a role that transcended mere reporting. They became conduits for menace, broadcasting the killer's self-appointed identity to thousands of concerned readers. Reporters dedicated themselves to analyzing the content, treating each encoded cipher like a journalistic scoop, a breakthrough moment, even though many simply served to deepen confusion rather than resolve it. The constant cycle of receiving these letters and then printing them created a morbid feedback loop, keeping the community under perpetual suspicion. This media entanglement solidified the Zodiac's grip on public consciousness, transforming him from a mere predator into a legendary, almost mythical figurehead of fear. The ensuing investigation proved to be exhaustive in scope, stretching across an extended period of time and consuming vast resources from law enforcement agencies. Investigators faced the overwhelming hurdle of tracking a killer who communicated exclusively through written word and cipher. The nature of the crime necessitated an enormous dedication, encompassing the gathering of circumstantial evidence related to multiple incidents of violence. Authorities were forced to dedicate considerable manpower to analyzing the various ciphers recovered over months and years. This relentless pursuit built up a vast but frustrating mountain of unconnectable data points, forcing investigators to constantly reassess their theories and premises regarding the perpetrator's background and motive. Despite the gravity of the murders and the relentless effort poured into solving the case, the core identity of the individual responsible remained frustratingly elusive. The extensive investigation continued year after year, resulting in a massive body of unsolved evidence centered around taunting letters and their coded components. Though much progress was logged, and countless theories were explored by experts and police alike, the killer's true profile remained locked away within the enigma. Because no definitive breakthrough could ever be achieved linking all aspects together, the investigation remains officially open to this day. The unsolved status of these events ensures that the terrifying mystery endures for future generations studying the decades-long pursuit of truth in Northern California. The initial appearance of these taunting communications marked a profound disruption in the community's peace. This was not merely crime reporting, it was direct communication with media outlets across Northern California. The perpetrator, who adopted the persona the Zodiac, deliberately used established channels, the local newspapers, as his primary megaphone to broadcast his actions. These letters served as more than just boastful claims of responsibility, they were detailed accounts that introduced complex coded messages into the public sphere. This tactic ensured maximum visibility for the killer's ego and amplified the scale of the terror felt by residents, making the media itself a central component in the investigation. Central to the mystery were the numerous encoded ciphers woven into the fabric of these letters. These codes represented an intellectual challenge, seemingly designed not only to taunt but also to showcase a sophisticated understanding of cryptography. Law enforcement and civilian experts poured immense resources into deciphering the cryptic symbols, spending countless hours attempting to find patterns or key sequences. The sheer variety of these ciphers, and the fact that several remained undeciphered decades later, added layers of complexity to the case file. This systematic engagement with complex mathematical puzzles defined much of the forensic effort, turning literary mystery into a puzzle requiring advanced academic consultation. The investigation was characterized by its geographical spread across Northern California, meaning that the investigative footprint spanned multiple communities and jurisdictions. This widespread nature complicated the effort to establish a single pattern of behavior or a consistent suspect profile. The killer's method allowed him to project power over vast distances, using the newspapers to connect localized incidents into one monolithic, terrifying narrative. Authorities were forced to coordinate efforts across different departments, each dealing with their own collection of evidence and theories surrounding the related murders. This massive operational scope contributed significantly to the overwhelming nature of gathering cohesive facts from disparate sources. Time itself became an intrinsic component of this long-running investigation, transforming fresh police work into historical preservation. The initial urgency gave way to decades of forensic review and reassessment. Over the passing years, different generations of law enforcement approached the evidence with updated scientific tools and changed investigative methodologies. Every new suspect pool required revisiting every piece of physical evidence, the taunting letters themselves being primary artifacts. This continual cycle of investigation meant that even small details found on a scrap of paper or within an early report gained immense significance as time progressed, fueling continuous academic and police study. The sheer volume and diversity of the physical evidence meant that the case developed into a comprehensive repository of unsolved details. This included not only the letters themselves but also associated forensic material, witness statements, and circumstantial findings accumulated over time. The investigation became defined by the analysis of these accumulating facts, creating an exhaustive picture of violence juxtaposed with layers of academic mystery. Experts analyzed literary styles, communication patterns, and cryptographic techniques drawn from this vast collective body of evidence. This immense detail ensures that the case maintains its profound complexity for those studying cold cases. The enduring mystery represents a failure point in investigative science and criminal profiling. Despite the undeniable proof of multiple murders attributed to one individual, linking that person back to the chilling evidence remains beyond conclusive reach. Every piece of recovered information points toward a terrifying shadow figure whose identity is unknown to the public record. Because no single thread could be pulled taut enough to confirm every theory, no motive, no definitive suspect profile, and no undeniable physical match, the case's file remains fundamentally open. This lack of closure guarantees that the pursuit of justice in Northern California continues to captivate and confound generations of researchers. The threat began subtly enough, delivered through carefully typed, taunting letters addressed to newspapers throughout Northern California. These communiques were not merely boastful, they served as complex psychological artifacts designed specifically for public consumption. The unknown sender established a direct, menacing channel of communication with the media landscape itself, suggesting an intricate awareness of journalistic practices and sensitivities. Each message contributed layers of mystery, shifting the focus from potential crime scenes to the intellectual puzzle posed by the correspondence. This sustained literary assault elevated the killings into something beyond simple violence, transforming them into a highly publicized cultural phenomenon. The sheer volume and calculated timing of these initial letters proved to be as unnerving a force as the murders themselves, building a pervasive atmosphere of dread across multiple communities. Central to the killer's taunt was the inclusion of numerous encoded ciphers within the accompanying letters. These were not casual puzzles but structured examples of cryptographic challenges, demanding specialized knowledge and intense dedication from law enforcement cryptographers. The deciphering process became a race against time, with experts dedicating countless hours to analyzing obscure patterns, numerical sequences, and textual substitutions. Different iterations of the cipher appeared over months, testing the limits of academic codesmanship. Initial attempts often yielded nothing but dead ends, frustrating dedicated intelligence officers who sought a single breakthrough key. This ongoing game of intellectual cat and mouse allowed the perpetrator to control the pace of investigation from afar. The very nature of the code suggests an advanced level of technical sophistication far exceeding the perceived capability of a typical criminal. Local law enforcement agencies reacted to the escalating incident with a combination of intense field investigation and increased public visibility measures. The police departments launched comprehensive sweeps through potential locales, attempting to correlate disparate pieces of forensic evidence into a coherent narrative thread. Due to the nature of communication via print media, every local newspaper became an accidental investigative hub, disseminating both critical leads and sometimes speculative rumors. Investigators were forced to contend with overwhelming amounts of public information, some reliable and much based on fear or misinterpretation. This intense media scrutiny placed immense pressure on police resources, diverting manpower away from traditional crime scene analysis towards public relations management. The resulting flurry of activity solidified the case's place in regional history, establishing a pattern of hypervigilance among local authorities. The Zodiac's repeated communication tactics ensured that public fear became an integral part of the case's narrative structure. By directing taunts explicitly to the press, the killer weaponized the media itself, turning journalists from passive reporters into active participants in the investigation's psychology. This control over information flow created a sense of perpetual anticipation and dread within Northern California communities. People were forced to confront the reality that an unseen force was analyzing their routines, their fears, and even the structure of their local journalism. The psychological impact extended far beyond the direct victims, casting a long shadow over everyday life and fostering deep suspicion among citizens. This sustained campaign solidified the Zodiacs as a mythological figure in regional law rather than just a criminal suspect. Over time, investigators were compelled to pivot their focus from mere recovery of evidence toward constructing detailed behavioral profiles of the perpetrator. Attempts at criminal profiling sought to deduce motive, whether it stemmed from ideological extremism, a deep-seated psychological break, or purely a desire for notoriety and control. These profile studies meticulously analyzed the killer's linguistic patterns, the complex challenges presented in the ciphers, and the specific nature of the taunts themselves. Behavioral analysts worked tirelessly to predict the next move, crafting theories about the criminal's intelligence level and geographic comfort zone. This intense academic effort contributed significantly to the public discourse surrounding unsolved mysteries. While brilliant deductions were made, none ever reached the necessary level of certainty required to cross the threshold from theory into actionable proof. Decades have passed since the initial flurry of letters and the high-stakes atmosphere of the late 1960s investigations. Yet, the file remains perpetually open, ensuring that the Zodiac Killer case continues to influence modern investigative methodologies and public fascination with cold cases. The mystery has transformed from a local crisis into an enduring national template for unexplained criminal history. Modern forensic technology now exists, techniques vastly superior to those available decades prior, that could potentially analyze the physical evidence left behind by the killer. These advancements perpetually keep the theoretical hope alive among dedicated researchers and authors. Ultimately, the case serves as a powerful historical record of investigative gaps, showcasing both the genius of human malice and the limits of scientific understanding. In the late years of the 1960s, a pervasive atmosphere of fear began to settle over parts of Northern California. Local law enforcement and residents found themselves unprepared for the sheer audacity and brutality that would soon emerge from the shadows. An unidentified killer targeted individuals in a methodical pattern, executing acts that were both sudden and chillingly calculated. This was not merely random violence, there was an intelligence behind the malice, suggesting a perpetrator who believed they were operating beyond conventional law enforcement reach. The nature of these attacks introduced a profound sense of vulnerability into everyday life, transforming public spaces from sites of routine activity into zones of apprehension and dread for the community at large. As the physical evidence gathered became impossible to reconcile with a simple motive, the killer shifted tactics, utilizing an insidious form of taunting communication. Responsibility for the escalating pattern of violence was claimed by an individual who masked his true identity behind letters addressed directly to local newspapers. These communications were designed not only to boast but also to draw maximum public attention and police focus toward the growing mystery. The anonymity of this self-proclaimed killer, who adopted the moniker the Zodiac, allowed him to operate outside any conventional investigative profile. Through these published claims, he effectively engaged in a psychological game with law enforcement and the reading public, escalating the threat far beyond just physical harm. Compounding the terror and confounding the initial investigations were the peculiar taunts that accompanied the letters. Along with explicit claims of guilt, the killer began including elements designed to puzzle experts and investigators alike. These documents frequently contained coded messages and complex ciphers, challenging the public's ability to decipher their meaning. This inclusion shifted the scope of the investigation from a purely criminal matter to one involving cryptography and linguistic analysis, requiring specialized academic skills that surpass standard police training. The use of these perplexing codes served as both intellectual play and further proof of the killer's calculated desire for notoriety, ensuring the case would maintain perpetual mystique. The murders occurred against the backdrop of Northern California's vibrant but often isolated communities, giving the perpetrator an unusual freedom of movement and operational space. While the physical geography provided anonymity, it also meant that the subsequent investigations had to span vast territories and various population centers. Investigators were faced with piecing together a pattern from disparate locations, a challenging task complicated by local jurisdictional boundaries and differing law enforcement resources. The killer seemed intimately familiar with these geographical details, allowing him to execute his plan while exploiting gaps in surveillance and communication between various police departments operating across the region. The intense local panic following each incident spurred an immediate, high-stakes mobilization of law enforcement resources within the community. Police departments dedicated significant manpower and intelligence units to tracing potential leads and analyzing every scrap of physical evidence collected at crime scenes. Investigators were forced to rapidly evolve their investigative techniques, moving from basic detective work into areas requiring psychological profiling and intensive pattern recognition. The collective effort created an unprecedented level of public involvement, fueling both extreme media interest and intense scrutiny upon the investigating agencies themselves regarding perceived failures or limitations in their procedures. Despite an extensive campaign marked by relentless investigative efforts, vast resources, and the application of newly developed forensic theory during its time, the killer's identity never surfaced in a conclusive manner. The initial active phases of the investigation eventually cooled down, leaving behind mountains of evidence, the letters, the ciphers, and documentation of the acts themselves. This perpetual state of unresolved inquiry meant that dedicated researchers and authorities had to treat the case as a historical artifact rather than an immediate crisis. Ultimately, this sustained lack of resolution enshrined the Zodiac Killer case in history's annals, transforming it into one of modern America's most enduring cold cases. The pattern of violence began surfacing slowly in the late 1960s across Northern California, linking seemingly disparate incidents under a single, terrifying umbrella. As murders occurred, their brutality and unsettling nature captured the public imagination immediately, sparking widespread fear throughout the communities involved. This nascent investigation was characterized by local police departments attempting to connect violent acts with motive, finding only obfuscation in the evidence left behind. Crucially, the killer did not limit his communication solely to physical violence, he seized the media as a megaphone for his malignant message. Through taunting letters, these communications bypassed traditional law enforcement channels entirely, directing their malicious narrative straight into the heart of the public consciousness. The papers became both news conduits and unintended instruments of fear, broadcasting the mystery alongside the details of the brutality. Beyond simply confirming acts of violence, the communication emanating from the individual who called himself the Zodiac was deeply psychological in nature. The letters were not merely announcements of fact, they constituted calculated taunts aimed directly at law enforcement and the general public alike. This correspondence demonstrated a chilling sense of control and superiority over those tasked with solving his crimes. He took pleasure not only in the act itself but in the resulting chaos, treating the investigation as a game of intellectual dominance. Each letter added layers to the enigma, confirming that the perpetrator saw himself as an elusive opponent rather than just a deadly assailant. This conscious effort to engage in communication turned the criminal record into a sprawling, taunting literary piece designed purely for maximum public psychological distress and sustained media attention. Central to the puzzle presented by this unknown figure were the elaborate codes contained within the bulk of the correspondence. The killer routinely included cipher messages alongside his boasts, transforming criminal statements into cryptic puzzles for deduction. These ciphers necessitated specialized knowledge and intense focus from both professional investigators and amateur codebreakers alike. Analyzing these encoded texts became a significant side quest to the actual murders, diverting resources and keeping the case perpetually intellectualized. The structure of the codes, sometimes complex substitution patterns, other times more subtle linguistic puzzles, suggested either profound academic study or an almost casual arrogance regarding his own intellectual prowess. Every uncracked cipher added another impenetrable layer to the mystery, serving as a persistent taunt that mocked the very concept of resolution. The response from the media was immediate and disproportionately massive, fueling intense public interest in solving the perplexing crimes. Newspapers devoted entire sections to reporting on the escalating mystery, essentially turning the search for justice into a daily spectator sport. This relentless journalistic coverage amplified the visibility of the case far beyond localized police jurisdiction, ensuring it remained a prominent fixture in American crime reporting. Law enforcement often felt caught between containing the public hysteria and conducting meticulous investigations grounded in physical evidence. The media's passionate involvement created both crucial momentum and considerable challenges for official investigative units. It became clear that the narrative surrounding the Zodiac Killer was as powerful a driving force as any piece of forensic evidence itself, dominating headlines for years to come. The geographical scope of the alleged crimes was deeply rooted in the specific landscape of Northern California during that volatile era. Investigators were tasked with traversing varied terrains, from suburban streets to more rural areas, attempting to establish a pattern in the killer's movement. This regional focus provided crucial details regarding potential operational methods and disposal points across the area. The investigators had to piece together timelines that spanned different towns and communities within the region, linking multiple instances of violence seemingly by chance. Despite this broad geographical spread of incidents, no single motive or consistent point of origin could be definitively established. The vastness of Northern California itself contributed to the overwhelming nature of the investigation, making definitive pursuit incredibly difficult for authorities struggling to cover such a large area while chasing phantom leads. Even as the initial flurry of activity began to subside, the case maintained an enduring, haunting presence within the culture of American true crime. The volume of evidence, the letters, the unsolved ciphers, and forensic reports from decades past created a massive historical repository of unexplained violence. While operational investigations cooled down, the mystery was never permitted to truly die, simply settling into a permanent, active state of being researched by dedicated civilian authorities. This sustained effort meant that subsequent generations of researchers had to build their entire case history upon the initial fragmented data. The unanswered questions regarding motive and identity proved robust enough to withstand the passage of decades, ensuring its continued classification as one of modern America's most compelling, yet unresolved, historical puzzles. The theatrical element of the communication soon became as pervasive a factor in the case as the crimes themselves. It wasn't just the violent attacks that drew public attention, but the method of confession and taunting displayed through print media. These self-styled correspondents created a unique blend of criminal menace and intellectual puzzle. By sending letters to various newspapers throughout Northern California, the unknown sender not only claimed responsibility for horrific acts but also sought an audience for their theatrical pronouncements. This continuous publication served as a psychological extension of the investigation itself, ensuring that the killer remained perpetually visible in public consciousness. The letters were designed to control the narrative, allowing the perpetrator to dictate the terms and maintain a power dynamic with law enforcement and the public alike, far exceeding the immediate fear induced by the crimes. Central to the mythology built around the Zodiac was the use of complex cryptographic devices. The correspondence often contained codes and ciphers, presented as intellectual challenges to be solved by outside minds. This element transformed the investigation from a purely forensic effort into an elaborate public game of cat and mouse played through written language. Decades were spent attempting to break down these encoded messages, leading brilliant cryptographers, mathematicians, and linguists to contribute their expertise to the cause. The cipher mechanism itself became an active part of the evidence record, forcing researchers to treat mathematics as forensic science. These riddles created a unique dimension of engagement for the public, making solving the codes a highly publicized secondary obsession that kept the case perpetually in the news cycle through intellectual pursuit alone. The sheer geographical scope of Northern California played an integral role in establishing the depth and complexity of this enduring mystery. Investigation stretched across varied terrain, encompassing both bustling metropolitan areas and quieter, seemingly anonymous neighborhoods marked by residential sprawl. This dispersion meant that investigators were not tracking a singular pattern confined to one locale, rather, they were dealing with repeated terror dispersed across distinct communities. The fact that the threat was decentralized made establishing jurisdictional oversight incredibly difficult for law enforcement agencies involved. Moreover, the vastness of the region contributed to a feeling of inescapable ambiguity. The killer seemed as at home in any patch of ground or densely populated urban corner across the entire area. What defined the Zodiac Killer case for investigators was not simply the act of violence, but the complete absence of a definitive profile closure. Despite mounting evidence and meticulous forensic sweeps conducted by dedicated authorities, the identity remained stubbornly unknown throughout all phases of study. This lack of conclusive identification meant that every theory developed, be it psychological, geographical, or organizational, operated in a state of pure speculation rather than confirmed fact. Investigators were forced to continually revise their understanding of the threat based on circumstantial paper trails and coded messages, always lacking the anchor point of who was responsible. This perpetual uncertainty created an academic framework where the details of the crime superseded the closure that all detective work inherently strives for. The lasting impact of this unsolved mystery continues to mold cultural understanding of true crime itself. It demonstrates a historical failure point, a gap in the institutional record that remains perpetually open and drawing academic attention. The Zodiac Files represent one of modern American history's most enduring case studies in criminal anonymity, forever enshrining the concept of the unseen perpetrator. This means that every subsequent investigation into similar crimes is measured against the complexity of this unsolved puzzle. The letters, the ciphers, and the circumstantial evidence become archetypal components for unexplained violence within North American crime law. It established a high watermark for unresolved brutality, permanently attaching the name Zodiac to intellectual mystery alongside physical dread. To this day, the case remains officially open, functioning almost as a perpetual academic seminar in forensic science and investigative history. The sheer weight of decades-old, fragmented data forms an insurmountable collection that defies simple classification or resolution. This ongoing status ensures that new theories and external research continually flow into the historical repository of the case. It requires dedicated effort from modern researchers who must sift through the institutional inertia created by passing years of investigations. Ultimately, the enduring puzzle demands a level of persistent commitment that transcends standard law enforcement mandates, cementing its place as an active cultural artifact rather than merely a closed book of tragedy. Unlike many notorious criminal cases that culminate in an arrest or a definitive trial verdict, the Zodiac File lacks this traditional narrative catharsis. This absence of closure has become perhaps its most defining characteristic over the decades. The investigation effectively dissolved into perpetual inquiry, shifting from active policing to historical contemplation. The failure to connect the taunting messages to a single identity created a vacuum that only myth and theory could fill. Investigators have wrestled with the psychological void left by an escape artist who communicated solely through cryptic challenge. This profound lack of accountability means that the case never truly ended, it merely crystallized into a permanent enigma. The sheer weight of its unresolved status continues to fuel scholarly debate far removed from the original crime scenes. The cipher messages themselves transcended simple evidence, they became linguistic artifacts demanding scholarly interpretation. These encoded puzzles transformed the murders from purely violent events into an intellectual battleground between predator and analyst. Generations of cryptographers and linguists have dedicated countless hours attempting to crack the complex, layered codes left behind by the perpetrator. Every known cipher suggests a level of premeditation and specialized knowledge that elevates the killer beyond a common criminal profile. The dedication required to analyze these sequences demonstrates how the mystery has become rooted in cryptography as much as in true crime lore. These challenging messages continue to provoke sophisticated research efforts globally, treating them like academic texts rather than simple threats. The intense, widespread media coverage acted as both an amplifier and a distorting force upon the actual events that transpired in Northern California. Newspapers functioned not just as reporting tools, but sometimes as willing participants in the killer's game, providing the perfect conduit for his taunts. This constant public visibility ensured that the name Zodiac remained perpetually circulating through pop culture consciousness long after the original timeframe closed. The narrative surrounding the case became more potent and visible to the general public than the actual archival police reports. Media fascination transformed a collection of cold cases into a national myth, making the unsolved status an intrinsic part of regional folklore. It proved that sometimes, the story told about a crime becomes louder and more enduring than the facts of the crime itself. The geographical area of Northern California became inextricably linked to the sinister reputation established by these unsolved acts. Specific landscapes, the roads, the towns, the natural environment, are forever stained by the shadow of this killer's presence. It represents a physical haunting that transcends mere history. It is woven into the regional identity and the local collective memory. The case transformed certain stretches of roadway from mundane thoroughfares into areas imbued with an unsettling layer of unsolved dread. This connection means that locals and researchers alike treat the geography itself as part of the investigative landscape, searching for residual evidence or pattern repetition within the environment. The area functions as a permanent open-air museum of brutality and mystery, constantly under academic and cultural scrutiny. Over the decades, forensic science has advanced dramatically, offering entirely new methodologies for analyzing residues or patterns of behavior. While these advancements have given modern researchers powerful tools, they have not provided a definitive key to unlock the Zodiac's identity. The case now serves as a crucial real-world testing ground, demonstrating the evolution and limits of criminal investigative science. Modern techniques can analyze materials that were simply untestable during the late 1960s investigations. This continuous comparison between historical methods and current technology highlights not just the mystery, but also the immense scientific progress achieved by forensic experts globally. It frames the killer's activities as a unique academic dataset for future criminal behavior analysis and technological improvement. Ultimately, the legacy of the Zodiac Killer is encapsulated by its continuing refusal to conclude. The mystery itself, this perpetual state of being unsolved and hotly debated, constitutes the final answer more thoroughly than any hypothetical confession could. It ensures that the case remains a living, breathing subject of academic inquiry and public fascination for future generations. The enduring power lies in the tantalizing sliver of evidence, the incomplete puzzle pieces that suggest an explanation is close but never quite reachable. This status elevates the Zodiac file from a crime record into a cultural touchstone, symbolizing the ultimate limits of human investigation. It represents the profound, frustrating question mark at the end of a chapter that still refuses to be officially closed by history. This video is a dramatized recreation based on publicly reported information.